Good Shabbos. I have to tell you, I'm very uncomfortable doing this because it's not something that I'm used to doing, and I'm not familiar that much with the technology of doing it. And it's distressing to have to look at my face while I talk. But hopefully you can close your eyes and listen to the message. And I think it's one of relevance to the time of year that we're at, the situation that we find ourselves in now, the Torah portion that we're dealing with this week as well. This week's Torah portion is Vayikra, and he called. It's God calling to Moses, and it's explained that it's calling with a language of affection. That's in opposition to other times that God calls to some of the prophets of the non-Jewish world, and there it's referenced as Vayikra, without the sound at the end. It's just a kind of happenstance, a situation that just they bump into each other sort of thing. Like you meet somebody at Checkers or Pick and Pay, or like you used to, without deliberation, without the intention, without the affection. And the Medrash explains that when Moshe came down from Mount Sinai, we read about it a couple of weeks ago, when he came down on the day after Yom Kippur with those, on Yom Kippur rather, with the two tablets that marked the resumption of relationship between God and the Jewish people, because we've been forgiven for the sin of the golden calf, after he'd spent practically 80 days on the mountain begging God to forgive the Jewish people, putting himself on the line to the extent that he said, "Take me out of your book if you won't forgive them." He came down after that. He came down and his face was shining. There were these beams of light, these what are called karnei hod. Michelangelo mistakenly translated them as horns of light, and that's why his statue of Moses has those horns on them. But these beams of light that shone from his forehead, that accompanied him and were overpowering and overwhelming, and so that he had to put a veil over his face when he talked to the regular guys. And the sages ask, where did this shine come from? And why was it when he was coming down the second time and not the first time? And they explained that the shine comes from the leftover ink that Moses used to write the Torah. What leftover ink? I mean, if God was supplying the necessary resources, he surely supplied exactly the right amount of ink. What's this extra ink? Where did it come from? And Reb Meir Shapiro suggests that the extra ink was what was salvaged from the fact that when Moses wrote the book of Vayikra, and he wrote the first word, Vayikra, and he took the aleph and he made it a smaller letter rather than a normal sized letter aleph. What's the difference? Because of the connotation of Vayikra with an aleph that implies this level of affection, Moshe didn't want to boast about the fact that God had that sense of relationship with him. He was a bit uncomfortable about the attention. He couldn't leave out the aleph totally, because that would have made the word Vayikar, which meant happenstance, which would have meant like God was talking to somebody that God didn't really care about. So he made the aleph a little bit smaller. And with this leftover ink that was a product of both his humility and his self-sacrifice for the Jewish people, that's what caused him, when he touched himself on his forehead and on his face, to cause these extra sheen and shine of light to come forth. What does it have to do with us? What does it have to do with now? The book of Vayikra is a lot about sacrifices. It's about the technology of the tabernacle and the temple, how the priestly caste and the Levites were commanded to run the day-to-day situation of offerings, how people were meant to be able to make up mistakes that they'd made, to celebrate wonderful occasions in their lives, and a whole number of reasons for offerings that brought us closer to Hashem. The word korban, which is the word offering, sacrifice, also has the root of the word to draw near. Lekarev means to become close. And so the suggestion is that the sacrificial rites that we read about in the temple were really there in order to bring us closer to God, sometimes closer to ourselves as well. And Moshe, at the beginning of his book, writes the word Vayikra with a small aleph instead of a big aleph because he feels humble about the fact that God is calling to him and to us with a specific, special affection as opposed to just happenstance that is just going on. What does this have to do with us and now? Aside from the fact that we're all making certain sacrifices at this point, sacrifices in terms of mobility, sacrifices in terms of communication, sacrifices in terms of comfort, for the good of ourselves and for the good of each other. The very name of this coronavirus that we're dealing with starts with the same letters as the word Vayikra and Vayikar. The kuf and the resh, they make the kar sound, the kra sound. We have a choice of whether we understand them as coming from Vayikar. Is it kar, ona, or is it kara, na? Is the root of this disease just some happenstance of nature gone wild, some monkey and some bat or whatever the story is that just happened to happen and is infecting us all and causing this pandemic? Or do we see it with the eyes of a Jew and the eyes of Torah, and do we understand that kara with an aleph means that it's God calling? It's God calling to us. It's God calling to us to not only to correct our ways, not only to make sacrifices, but it's God calling to us to come closer. It's God calling to us to come closer both to Hashem himself and to each other as a community. I think this social distancing that we've been experiencing has driven home just how important we are all each to each other and how much we actually miss the regularity of contact with each other in a much more real and less virtual kind of way. Karana, please call. Please call God. Please call each other. Make sure that you're okay. Make sure that the other person's okay. See how they're doing. Keep up their spirits. There are so many negative things that can develop from an enforced stay at home. Aside from tensions, people with an inclination toward depression can find themselves becoming more depressed. There's nothing to make you forget about what's going on and who you are and having to confront yourself. So a phone call is always welcome. It's always a bit of ray of light, if you will, a carne or, into the lives of the people that you reach out to. Please do that. Please maintain the strength of our community and the communality of our community by being aware of each other, by calling out to each other. And please join us when we call out to God. And we do that very shortly. And we'll be doing that during the week. And do it in your own time, with your own words, without a book. Somebody said, we might be in quarantine, but God certainly isn't. And he's here with us, and he's there waiting to be addressed in terms of affection, to be called out to, and not just to be seen as a happenstance. And that's what I would urge of you to take as a bit of a lesson from this week's Torah portion. Looking forward to speaking with you again closer, just after 5:30, when we're closer to Shabbat. In the meantime, the neat thing about this is that I can talk for as long as I want. It's amazing. I wish you good Shabbos and a healthy one.